Hello, and welcome to Leadership in the City. I'm Julie Fox, Associate Chair for the Department of Extension at Ohio State University. Today's module is on entrepreneurial leadership. This is an introduction to our foundational course for this curriculum. When we look at leadership in the city, in one of our earlier modules, we talked about the three overarching themes of entrepreneurial leadership, entrepreneurial networks, and entrepreneurial innovation. In this particular component, or in this module, we're looking and focusing at the entrepreneurial leadership topic and that intersection between the science of entrepreneurship and the science of leadership, and the difference that this can make in Ohio cities. Today's agenda is to begin with, let's look at the session purpose, and then the learning objectives and competencies, which are essential to this module. Then we'll look at the essential elements of entrepreneurship at the individual and organizational levels, entrepreneurial leadership and that intersection of those two sciences, entrepreneurship in public and nonprofit organizations. I think this is especially important because so many people naturally associate entrepreneurship with private enterprise and sometimes just new business or fast-growing businesses, but there's a lot to learn from entrepreneurial endeavors in public and nonprofit organizations. We'll also look at that unique city perspective with entrepreneurial leadership. We'll share some learning resources, review and reflect, and get ready for what's next. So let's get started. The purpose of today's session is why entrepreneurship theory and practice for extension? Well, there are a number of reasons. We have increasing diversity in the audiences that we serve, new technologies that we can use to interact with the people that we work with, changes in traditional funding, complex issues, especially in our larger cities, with that urban, suburban, rural interdependencies, and some uncertain times for us and the people that we work with. One of the quotes that I like is, in a rapidly changing world, organizations need to continually identify new opportunities beyond existing competencies if they are to survive. And I think this is especially true for organizations like our own with a rich 100-year history. The learning objectives and the competencies. At the end of this module and the activities that we'll talk about at the end, I hope that you increase your awareness of various entrepreneurial frameworks. I hope you have a better understanding of the entrepreneurial leadership linkages. Behavior-wise, I'd like you to review and contrast at least 2 articles and select the factor that you are most interested in developing as an individual and as an organization or as a team. And so we'll have a chance to look at what some of those factors might be. And we'll talk about that activity at the end of today's module. Long term, I hope that you can take this entrepreneurial leadership theory and apply it into your everyday work. So, some of the essential elements, this overview of entrepreneurial leadership. Entrepreneurship has been looked at from various disciplines, from psychology, anthropology, sociology, economics, and management throughout our history. This research focus has started with individual traits like risk-taking behavior or being creative, and then has spread into organizational entrepreneurship. I'm especially excited about this because this is a topic of my dissertation with my PhD work. To begin, the word entrepreneurship comes from 2 terms, French and German words, to do something differently or to undertake. And some of the characteristics or traits that were talked about at that individual level where it started were individual characteristics, their motivations, why they were involved in entrepreneurial endeavors, their aspirations, what they wanted to achieve, perceived barriers and how they handled risk-taking, their ways of thinking and making decisions, and their competencies as entrepreneurs. As I mentioned, this moved from the focus on individual characteristics and traits to organizational behaviors and characteristics. So some of the frameworks that have been used with organizational entrepreneurship are entrepreneurial orientation, entrepreneurial management, there's an entrepreneurial performance index, and the corporate entrepreneurship assessment instrument. And you'll have this material in print too, so you don't have to digest it all here just on this slide, but you can see some of the factors that are discussed with each of those 4 different scales, and you can see some similarities and some unique differences. So when we take a look at what factors that you want to focus on, you might want to see the most pressing need in your organization or in your team, and what appeals to you to focus on. When it comes to strategic orientation, there's a continuum. Not to make it appear that one end of this continuum is better than the other, but to recognize that if you look at Stevenson's work, where some people lean toward the trustee end of the continuum and some lean toward the promoter and going after that new business and new projects kind of continuum, not to create polarity, but recognize there is a continuum, and the people that you work with in organizations and the organizational policies and processes might support one or the other, or lean toward one way or the other. So awareness of these continuums, I think, can add great value in the work that you do with individuals, teams, and within the organization. Some people have looked at entrepreneurship as a process. It begins with opportunity, focused on that stakeholder focus, but beginning with opportunity. And different people have different methods in place to scan for information. For example, you might subscribe to certain listservs, or have an email come to your inbox, or things that you read that help you better understand the stakeholders that you work with and the things that you want to achieve within your organization. One of the things I like to do is when I visit different offices to meet with some stakeholders, I like to look at their coffee table and see what magazines they have out there. So recently, when I was in the Franklin County Commissioner office, I noticed they had the publication called Governing. So when I came back to my office, I Googled Governing magazine, and then I decided to subscribe, and I get a daily email from them. I think you can also get a digest if you want. But not only do I receive good information that helps me better understand their perspective, but I receive email that that I share with other people that I'm working with, like in Thriving Cities or Sustainable Cities, and it's a good way to share resources across your network. So that opportunity piece comes first. And then, based on that information from that stakeholder focus, what kind of things do we want to create? And later in this curriculum, we'll talk about entrepreneurial innovation. And then what strategies can be put into place to support that innovation. And sometimes that's existing strategies or policies and process, and sometimes those are new. And then the operational piece, again, that process and policies to support that. But it's a continual learning process for you as an individual and as a team. And doing that in the context of a changing environment and changing organization and sometimes changing personnel. But I think by recognizing that process, you can see that it's not just one great idea in the shower or, one good thing that we copied from someone else, but an ongoing process and some things that you can do to help you move forward with your entrepreneurial interests. Looking at the crossover between entrepreneurship and leadership, some of the elements that are discussed are that vision piece of entrepreneurship, the ability to influence others, leading in the context of innovation and creativity, which is sometimes uncertain. Some people have a greater degree of comfort with that than others. And then the essential planning piece, that it takes a lot of follow through and a lot of hard work. Some people think that entrepreneurship is just the creative process, but there's a lot of hard work and planning to make things become a reality. Another part of research that has been done with entrepreneurial leadership is looking at how some of the elements might change based on where an organization is or where a project is in development. So at each stage of development, as many as 3 different stages of development, from forming to developing to having ongoing work, is what's the entrepreneurial leader at that stage of business? What do they do? And what's the context that they operate in? And so it changes a little bit during stages of development, both within an organization, within team development, or within project development. I also want to share with you some information about entrepreneurship in public organizations. And that theme, again, of focus on vision and opportunity, the ability to influence others, and in this project, really looking at ability to convince and empower others. And sometimes those can be 2 different things. Forging new, powerful, productive linkages at the intersection of business, government, education, and community. And I think in our work in the cities, this is especially important, and some of the best practices that we see really do look at those linkages that include public, private, and other entities throughout the community. That's multiple stakeholder influence or multiple constituencies rather than focusing on economic markets. That's unique in many cases with public and nonprofit organizations, that's where the focus lies and not just on making a profit. But when it comes to profit, when it comes to entrepreneurship and public organizations, that profit is more of a means than an end. So it's not that you don't want to focus on it, and it's important to look at the financial portfolio that you have, but it's more of a means to accomplish what you want. Obstacles to entrepreneurship, sometimes within organizations, it's policies, procedures, bureaucracy, personnel restrictions, and reward limitations. And so those issues, many times we have to address within our organization and see, okay, where are we? What can we do to help convince and empower others to help develop some of those things to support entrepreneurial leadership within our organization. From a city perspective, as I mentioned earlier, that multiple stakeholder agenda and trying to kind of meet the needs and objectives of multiple organizations without having unintended consequences with others. And looking at sustainable development within your team and organization, within the city or community or neighborhood that you're working with. And also kind of balancing the risk and resources. And toward the end of this curriculum, we'll talk about what that means for us and our work in the city. There are a number of resources that James Stiving and I pulled together and put on Buckeye Box to share when it comes to entrepreneurial leadership. You have an invitation to Box, and we also can print some of these if you want and put them in your notebook. But there are articles when it comes to individual entrepreneurship, organizational entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial leadership, and entrepreneurship in nonprofit and public organizations. So as you look forward now and you review, reflect, and get ready for what's ahead, some key points we talked about include entrepreneurial science at the individual, team, and organizational level, as well as looking at the entrepreneurial process. Not that one is right or wrong, but to look from the different perspectives can be valuable. Look at entrepreneurship and leadership linkages, entrepreneurship and public organizations, and that strategic orientation continuum, not to create polarity, that entrepreneurship endeavors or being a promoter versus a trustee is better or worse, but just recognizing those continuums. One of the activities that you can do is here I say review at least one article. Earlier I said as many as two, so you can kind of compare and contrast. But the important part of this activity is to identify one element from the theory that you would like to improve in your practice. And if you want, take this even not at only at your individual entrepreneurial leadership level, but also at the organizational level. And if you look in Box at those different articles, there are many factors for you to consider. And so not to make it overwhelming with all of those factors, but to help you hone in on maybe something that you want to focus on specifically. Consider what obstacles that you might need to address and what support you would need to ask for from me, from your regional directors, from our extension director or dean, or maybe even higher up the ladder if we need to. And what resources or help do you need to support you in your entrepreneurial leadership efforts? An optional activity for those overachievers is to identify a person that you think is an entrepreneurial leader and describe how they demonstrate leadership. I think this would be a great opportunity to share this with others in this program. And I think when you see someone who really illustrates entrepreneurial leadership in the work that they do, you can see those factors in action that make it work. You can see how they overcome some of the obstacles. So what to prepare for or what to expect in our live session coming up in a couple weeks is we'll do a review of entrepreneurial leadership in the city context. We'll have discussion about your activity. We'll discuss this pilot program since this is the first time we're getting together in person, and we'll review the content as well as the process so that you can get the most out of this program. And then we'll talk about how you can prepare for upcoming modules and look how that applies to your own professional development. There are resources in Box. There are resources in the campus there that we have through eExtension on Moodle. And we also have resources on our website, cityextension.osu.edu. I look forward to working with you, and I'll see you soon.